future female funding. And you know me most of all, at least those who I don't know yet. Hello, I'm Eve, Women in AI Ambassador, and this session is organized together with our dear partner, Oracle for Startups, and we are very happy to have amazing, inspiring speakers with us today. The moderator of the session later on will introduce you to the panelists and start the discussion. But here I am with a little introduction to present to you Women in AI. If you're not the member yet, or partner, or follower, please do consider and join us. Sharing with you the deck that I have prepared for this session. Okay. So what is Women in AI? Many people are wondering, there's so many organizations, women in this, women in that. Women in AI is an organization, non-profit global do tank that operates across the globe with plus 4,000 members already, 100 countries and 35 ambassadors, focusing on achieving its mission to increase the representation of women in the field of artificial intelligence, data science, machine learning. So we are, if we put it as a triangle, focusing on AI-centered innovation and education that also matches the national agenda. Whether it's Netherlands, United States, or any other local chapter, we all trying to achieve the balance in our ecosystem and bring our countries to innovation. Diversity, inclusion, and equality. Three very important words for us. Bridging the gender gap hasn't been as important as today. And we are doing it by creating symbiosis with different partners in our ecosystem, working together with other non-for-profit organizations, but also commercial companies and the government. You've probably attended some of our events across the globe. Here's a little bit of examples of our initiatives. This year it's mostly about virtual WaiTALKs, as we call them, webinars. This one is one of our events that we're organizing. Now, what has changed since the beginning of the organization? We've been always focusing on AI awareness, general empowerment of women. But last year, we looked deeper into the imbalance in the startup ecosystem. Because literally, a lot of researchers show that there are so many men and so little a small amount of women working in this field. We ask our community, our members who are talented innovators, who are ready to become founders, but something stopped them from taking the step forward. Confidence to take risk, monetizing on the idea, and finding initial funds to start. Not the big capital, but the actual like little amount of money from, I don't know, 20K to 50K is still an issue for bringing ideas to life. So we launched WaiACCELERATE program, the first ethical leadership business acceleration program that is focusing on the innovators in that particular stage before they start building their startups. Because we drive this program together with so many organizations, and by doing that, we bring knowledge, learning, experience, and capabilities for ensuring that the startups that are in the boarding become successful and grow fast to become scale-ups. Saying that, a few examples of our participants. We have 32 women in the incubator in our program right now, who are to become ethical leaders and also focusing on sustainable development goals to create social impact. 17 of them based in the Netherlands, the rest from Australia to the United States. And these are a few of the examples that you can look at and explore later on. This is contact information with the website, always ask a question, but without further ado, I would stop sharing my screen and introduce to you our moderator for today. And Women in AI, the whole team is so proud to be working with Oracle for Startups and especially with Amy Soros, who is Global Director for Communications at Oracle for Startups. Amy, thank you so much for helping us and inspiring others. The stage is yours.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Eve, for that introduction. As Eve said, I'm Amy Soros. I'll be your moderator for this discussion today. I'm part of the Oracle for Startups team, and Oracle for Startups is a global program that supports entrepreneurs and innovators across the globe with a wide variety of resources, from cloud technologies to mentorship to business enabling opportunities like introductions to our customers. And we really work with a wide variety of startups, all stages, all technologies. So if you are interested in learning more, we'll be in, certainly be in contact, and we'd love to talk to you a little bit more. On to the topic of the day, the F word, future female funding. This is a very important, very complex topic in its own environment, but we're going to talk about it against the backdrop of some unprecedented times. So we're viewing this through the lens of a global pandemic, a global recession, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter, and pushing to the forefront some much needed conversations around racial diversity and inclusion. So there's a lot to unpack here, and we are going to do our very best to do justice to this big topic. And I think we're going to do fairly well, and it's because of the 4 panelists that I'm about to ask them to introduce themselves. These individuals are very, very insightful. They're really thoughtful and smart about their approaches to really tackling this problem and making change. So with that, I'd like for them to each introduce themselves. Maren, let's start with you. If you could do a brief introduction, and then we'll go through the rest of the panelists.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maren Bannon, and I'm the co-founder of January Ventures. We are a fund to invest in female and underrepresented founders at the early stage, pre-seed and seed. We invest across the US as well as Europe. My background is I'm originally from the Bay Area, spent most of my life and career there. I moved to Europe about 3 years ago. I'm currently based in Amsterdam. I studied engineering in college and then spent most of my career working in operating roles in tech and in healthcare. Worked for some big tech companies, and then worked for some early stage startups, and then was a founder myself, and went through that amazing but definitely up and down journey of starting a company and growing it. About 3 years ago, we merged into a larger startup, and then I got the idea to found January Ventures. So that is my background, and I will pass it back to you, Amy.
Great, thank you. Renee, over to you.
Thank you so much, Renee Cummings. I'm a criminologist and criminal psychologist. I'm also an AI ethicist. I'm actually a new founder with an AI company, and my focus is on urban AI. And urban AI is really about bringing AI into an urban environment as a response to real-time solutions that are required in an urban dynamic. So it looks at everything from public safety to food security and climate security. Much of the focus right now is really looking at community-led policing initiatives, because we know those are some of the big challenges in urban America. Being a founder is in the AI space is definitely something new for me. I've been a consultant for about 15 years, but the majority of my work has been in criminal justice and law enforcement. I've traveled the world actually training law enforcement agencies. My specialization is homicide reduction and gun and gang violence reduction. Now my work as an AI ethicist is because of much of the challenges we've seen when it comes to diversity and equity and inclusion and systemic justice have been raised within the criminal justice system from an AI perspective. And I believe that criminologists have a major role to play in co-designing the future, as well as being the conscience of artificial intelligence. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to join these amazing women dealing with this fantastic topic. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Renee, thank you. And that's fascinating. I can't wait to get into that more in the content as we move along. Jenny, over to you, please.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. So my name's Jenny. I founded a company called Snap Vision, believe it or not, 9 years ago next week, which is scaring me. And we've always done AI and visual search in the fashion space. So we were the first people in the world to be able to do visual search for fashion across mobile and web. So we've got companies using our technology, like retailers, and we work with big technology companies as well. So we've been working with Oracle for a few years through the Oracle for Startups program. And yeah, my passion is basically helping enable more women into engineering and technology roles, and also helping women raise finance, because as you can imagine, in my 9-year journey so far, I've got a lot of stories, and I'm sure I've got a lot more to come.
Excellent. And I've had the privilege of knowing you for a number of years now, Jenny, as part of our program, and it's been wonderful. Yannicka, over to you. Ooh, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry,
That's
I was
okay.
talking. Hi, I'm Janneke. I'm from Amsterdam. I'm an entrepreneur turned investor. I've built 2 tech companies in the past that I both exited successfully. And now I've set up a seed fund, um, a seed fund where we invest in software technology companies, and we have a special model to evaluate entrepreneurial teams. And because we all know that teams are the most important part for the success of a company, but it's also difficult to measure, and we found a way to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And you are a newly published author, which we'll talk a little bit about that. So congratulations on that. Okay, we're going to jump straight into the content, but I do want to kind of set the stage with 2 points, 2 trends, 2 truths, really, because it's very important for the entire conversation we're going to have. And that is, number 1, there is more capital than ever, more capital available, COVID notwithstanding, but there are more sources for founders to get funding than ever before. Number 2, we're seeing report after report over the years of the data pointing to female-led companies and companies of diverse workforce generate better innovative practices, better collaboration, and most importantly, better financial results. So one would think with these 2 parallel trends that more funding would be going to this topic of this segment of the population, females. And we know that's not true. We know that number of funding to VC funding to women remains somewhere around 2 to 3%, very terrible. And for women of color, it's even worse. So with those 2 things, I want to really start talking about progress, where we are today and where we think we're really going to get to some meaningful changes. And Janneke, I want to start with you because you've been a long time champion of female tech and entrepreneurship. For you, can you talk about the years that you've been working? How do you view progress today? And when do we get to some real meaningful changes? And also, throwing a lot at you, how does today's environment of working from home and not having in-person communications and going to events, does that slow down our ability to progress? How does that impede moving this forward?
Yes, so I think that progress has been really slow. The big change that I see is when I started working on this topic a few years ago, people still were asking the question, is this really a problem? And I think by now everybody has agreed that it is a problem. What makes me really hopeful that we will see change is that we get more male champions as well. And I think this is a problem we need to solve altogether. And as long as it's just women working on it, it remains a women's issue. And I think having more prominent men involved as well makes a big difference and really helps into getting closer to well, a level playing field. And I think that's what everybody wants. I always say women don't need help, they just need equal opportunity and a level playing field. And but I think we're far from that. The reality still is that the numbers are pretty bad, and change is there really slowly. But well, there's small things that give me hope. And also in the VC space, more women starting their own funds, more minorities having their own funds. The tragedy is that you almost need to start your own fund to even get an opportunity in this space. But well, there's these small signs that make me really hopeful. I think the current situation makes things worse. One of the things that are key to get funding is network. And I also think that shouldn't be the case, but it is what it is today. A lot goes through introductions, and a lot of ways to get an introduction or where serendipity could happen are meetings, are events. And I think the current situation enforces the networks that are already there, and people helping each other that know each other. So I think, yeah, this is not a particularly beneficial time for change.
Yeah, you made a lot of good points there. Proud to say that we have quite a few gentlemen signed up for this webinar today, so that's good because we do need our male counterparts to help us. Maren, I want to turn to you because your firm, January BC, recently released some survey data about the impact of COVID-19 on specifically early stage startups. And there's a lot of interesting insights there. Actually, one of the interesting things to me was the disconnect around how startups view fundraising and VCs are viewing fundraising in this time. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the key insights that jumped out to you?
Yeah, sure. So back in April, we did a survey of 250 early stage founders, and we really just wanted to get a pulse on the market and see what founders were feeling like in that moment so that we could best serve them. And so the founders are spread out across the US as well as Europe, mostly pre-seed and seed stage, to give some context. I guess two things that gave me hope is two stats. Over half of the startups had already pivoted or were considering a pivot. So these early stage startups are really nimble. Over 80% had already taken really swift action to cut costs. So I think those two stats give me a lot of hope that the early stage startups will have, you know, the ability to get through this. A lot of them will. The other things that we found in the survey that I thought was interesting, we found that 83% of the founders said they were raising capital or planning to raise later this year. And 75% said that VCs, on the other hand, were taking longer to respond and were harder to reach. And I've heard that from a lot of VCs, that they've been very focused on portfolios, really sort of trying to figure out what the world looks like before making a lot of bets. So I think this could also be a sign. I've heard this terrible phrase recently called flight to quality, which I think people can mean sort of keeping to your inner circle, sort of echoing what Janneke said. I think at times like this can make it harder for female and diverse founders to break in. So my fund January, we started an event called Pitch Collective, and we did 2 of these over the last few weeks. But basically it's the idea of allowing female and underrepresented founders to pitch 7 funds at once without any intro. So part of it is allowing more access and not having them waste all that time teeing up intros to all these funds. And part of it is the efficiency of just being able to get onto one pitch call, reach a bunch of funds at once, and hopefully get some of that capital more quickly. So we've had really good response. We had 350 founders apply in just a week for our first event. And then we actually held a second event because we had so many applications that we really wanted to meet. So I think we're all right now just trying to find ways to really adapt to the new reality and support founders through this time.
That's great, because it is, like Janneke said, this is a challenging time. And it's been really inspiring to see firms like yourself come in with these opportunities like pitch sessions, because they're very needed, right? We need these right now. Renee, I want to go to you, because Black females have had a much harder and slower progress here. So can you give us, through your perspective, the same kind of question? How do you view progress today? And when do you think we're going to get to some real meaningful changes for future, where we don't see 2 or 3%, we see 15, 20, 30, 40, God forbid, 50% of the funding going to females? Can you talk about that?
Well, sure, thank you so much. I think when it comes to women of color, I think we have been the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs, but we have been, of course, underrepresented, underestimated, overlooked, and probably the last to get a check cut. But we have been very, very resilient, and that resilience comes from that creative imagination and that history of resilience. I think going back to what Maren and Janet said, it really is about that status quo that has been in place for a very long time. And I think when it comes to getting one woman in the door, the priority may not be a woman of color. I think what we've got to look at would be those networks and really having allies. And I think having those allies and that level of mentorship where you are really shaped into, you know, the spaces that you need to really fit in when it comes to the C-suite and really understanding that dynamic. And I think Maren talked about that pitch call. You know, how do we get to make that call? I think much of what happens when it comes to funding happens in particular spaces that we may not be there to hear the conversation or to have the access or to be in those groups. So I think when we're talking about sort of leveling the playing field, we've got to look at the playing field within tech and see how level that landscape is, because right now that landscape is still a bit uneven. And of course, we are seeing what's happening internationally with the movement of this time. And we've heard renewed commitments from big tech and from corporate just in general, where everyone right now wants to celebrate Black excellence, or, you know, excellence of people in color, Black and brown individuals. But I think we don't know where that is coming from now, because so much is happening. It could come from a place of honesty. It can come from a place of shame. It could come from a place of guilt. We don't know. And I think as a society moving forward, we've got to realize that where there is diversity, there are more options and there are more solutions. And where there's diversity, there is imagination and then more creativity. And I think if we have those allies, if we have those champions, if we have those mentors, and if we realize, particularly as women, and it's something that I just say all the time, you know, whenever we get an opportunity to go one step up on that ladder, we can always put our hand out and pull somebody up there with us. And that has always been my philosophy. And now, being new as a founder in the AI space, I am in a position where I'm asking myself, how do I get those mentors? You know, how do I get into those spaces? What do I have to do? And it's one of the reasons I jumped at this session, because I'm saying right now I'm positioned in a place to listen and to learn and to share, but also to see how do I strategize that game plan. So I think right now what we are seeing is a lot of attention just naturally focused on people of color. Where that is going to go, whether or not it's going to be long-term, I think that speaks to the kind of consciousness, and whether or not big business is going to operate with a new level of consciousness. And I think that's what we are all looking on to see. But I think we all have a very strategic role to play in pulling each other up and moving each other forward.
Yeah, you said so many great things right there. I love the whole, you know, climbing the ladder and reaching back, because that's important, right? We're going to touch on a lot of the things you talked about as we continue through this session. So thank you for that. Jenny, I would love for you to talk about, speaking of progress, you've raised funds in when times were wonderful and gangbusters, but you most recently successfully raised a fund during the pandemic, which I think is really interesting. And speaking of giving people hope, can you talk a little bit about maybe any lessons learned there for people listening and watching this that maybe need to be raising or considering raising? Can you share your lessons from that?
Yeah, of course. And I've raised in the good times, like you say, and I started the business in a recession. So I think I've kind of weathered the storms and the good times. And it sounds kind of negative, but fundraising's hard anyway. And I think that's kind of something that all founders know when they go into it. Raising in a pandemic is a new level of hard, I'm not going to lie. But I think there are actually quite a lot of positive things that I took from it as a process. I'm an eternal optimist, obviously, having started a company, but figured I'd share a few today. So I think I was lucky in the sense that I was mid-round when the pandemic hit. So we had a lot of conversations in flight. We had a lot of people with soft commitments. And naturally, when the pandemic hit, I saw quite a lot of conversations drop off. And it was basically family offices, high net worth individuals, smaller funds kind of taking a step back and saying, hang on a minute, do we need to look after our existing portfolio? Do I want to wait for the FTSE to see what happens if it bounces back? And there were a lot of kind of conversations, probably about 50%, where they went cold when they were being warm. But what really made me kind of sit up and think about the fact I was very lucky in the investors that I already have, and kind of coming to Renee's point around finding allies, is that if you already have investors in your company where they can follow on and make warm introductions, that is worth far more than capital, to be honest, when it comes to raising your next round. So I think when you're raising your first round of funding, I know it's been way more difficult for people who are seeding it at the beginning. I know that environment's way harder to fund at the moment. But if you can be more conscious of who you're bringing on in the early journey of where you're raising capital, it's very tempting to take just money. But if you're taking money and people who love the idea and introductions, that will kind of pave the way for going forward. I think kind of contrary to what a couple of people have said already, I actually like working from home. And I think it's actually been good for my fundraising. And I think we talk about diversity in the sense of gender and race. I also think when it comes to founders, there's this kind of diversity in points in introverts and extroverts. And I sometimes think that extroverts can win at fundraising because they can go into a room, they can make a load of noise, they're very good at working it. Well, Amy will testify to this. I'm a horrible introvert. I don't get my energy from that way at all. So I've actually found that raising from home, I've been far more targeted in my conversations, and that kind of level of bias gets eliminated, to be honest, when you're in this situation where it's all one-on-one conversations and it's not about how well you work a room. So I wouldn't be surprised if that began to go in favor of the kind of more technical founders out there who don't enjoy that kind of networking side. And then the final bit that I wanted to talk about, and actually it's a useful skill, whether there's a pandemic or not, but it's as an entrepreneur kind of getting used to working out who's got the money, who's willing to invest it, they're kind of actively looking for investments, and who are the investors who are interacting with you because they want to kind of bolster a pipeline. And obviously those pipeline conversations are worth having because you build those relationships over a number of years and they can really come to fruition. But when you're raising a round of finance quickly, just being able to get to the nub of who's raising, who's not, who's got funds to commit, who doesn't, and really kind of tapping into your entrepreneurial networks wherever you are. In London, there was a big spreadsheet going around of here are the investors who have money and who are investing, and here are the ones who don't. And I think just tapping into that network and getting really good at asking those questions that can feel quite pointed, but are actually really useful to you as a founder, that's a lesson worth taking away.
That's excellent. And yes, we've talked about the power of introverts, right? And that's really an interesting point I hadn't thought about, that you're actually thriving in this environment where you're not having to go out and social network as much. So that's really interesting. And we'll get into that, some of the topics you hit on in a little bit later. I do want to talk a bit more about specifically around the Rise Up Global Lives Matter movement and diversity for all women, right? And Renee, I want to start with you because I read an article recently from a very prominent Black female partner in a Silicon Valley VC. And I want to quote what she said. She's talking about this moment of reckoning on race. And I thought her quote was really interesting. I'm going to quote her. Quote, "It's both gratifying and frustrating. I personally have worked on these issues in the tech ecosystem for 10 years. It's been like pulling teeth to get people to pay attention long enough to actually make a change," end quote. You touched on this a little bit. Can you talk about her statements, and is this movement right now, are we ready to really accelerate change, or is it going to be more just virtue signaling? Oh, and you're on mute.
I think what she's saying is really clear. It's a feel-good moment because you think things are happening, but because you've been in the industry for this long and you've been there plowing, you're wondering whether or not this is going to be long-term change. I think what we've seen when it comes to big tech, maybe over the last decade, I think it's about $8 billion have been spent on doing things like diversity training, doing things like, looking at inclusion in the workplace, looking at things like subconscious bias and implicit bias, and looking at, when it comes to discrimination and trying to build frameworks that treat with that. And I think what a lot of people is saying, if we've spent billions of dollars trying to retrain and to change the culture, whether or not this is actually going to work. I think for lots of people, the initial signs have been positive because we've seen major contributions coming from big companies that look at investing in talent when it comes to people of color and really trying to help those in the community build out the kinds of initiatives that are required to build that level of capital and resources, and to also build up the psychological resources, which is something that has really been beaten down over the years. So I think that is what she's speaking to. Whether or not this is going to be long-term doesn't depend on the movement. It depends on each and every one of us who has the opportunity to do something and to make a difference in our space. how is that going to change our thinking, our philosophies, the ways in which we do business, the ways in which we think about each other? And when I speak about allies, we need each other. And I think whatever we have learned from this pandemic, from COVID-19, is how much we need each other. When we saw how the script was flipped when it comes to who became an essential worker and who was there to save our lives and who was the individuals we were depending on, the healthcare workers, the transport workers, right? Security, the individuals at the supermarket and the stores who were there. And we realized women were on the front line. Women of color on the front line. Poor women were on the front line. Women, again, are the ones who pretty saved us when it came to much of what we're experiencing. So I think it really comes back to us. And we have got to look into ourselves and see how much we can do and how much we can help. So when it comes from diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's about all of us. And I think when we are speaking about women, I don't like to, speak about us in all these different variations, although we are more bounded by our commonalities than by our differences as women. So I think it comes back to us. And I think what we realize is that we all need funding. We all need funding. And I think if we can collaborate more, that speaks to diversity for me. It's collaboration among women. And that will bring that level of inclusion and equity that we're looking for.
Yeah, no, well said. And you're talking about, it does start with the individual being intentional, looking in your own actions, your own network, thinking more clearly about what we're doing, just being more intentional. And Maren, I want to switch to you because I think this is very relevant, and that is you recently rebranded and changed your company's name and rebranded from Jane VC to January VC. And it's important to know this is not a reaction to recent events. This has been 6 months in the works, but I think it's really important why you did that. Can you talk to the audience about that a bit?
Sure. So we launched initially as Jane VC, and about 6 weeks ago, we changed our name from Jane VC to January Ventures. The reason for this was that we felt like Jane connotates a certain type of woman, and we didn't feel like it was as inclusive as we wanted our vision, as our vision is for January. So we decided to make the change about 6 weeks ago. My co-founder for January is actually a Latina woman. We've invested in 23 companies, and 50% are founded by a woman of color. 20% have a Black founder. So we just, I think in seeing the type of people that we are investing in, we really wanted a brand that was as inclusive and expansive as that. So we made that change. And I think the work that we're doing feels more important than ever now. We really believe the next decade's unicorns are going to be built by a much more diverse group of people. And I think diversity has so many different dimensions. It's not just gender and race, but it's geography, sexual orientation, age. And so we really look to all of this in trying to build a fund that speaks to a wide range of people.
Yes, no, and you're so right. Diversity is so much more than gender, right? It is a bigger, very important topic. Yannicka, I want to kind of go back to what we were talking about. In this current environment, we've seen firms like, Benchmark and Sequoia and Bessemer tweeting out thoughts and how they're going to be making changes. And some people are questioning the motivation simply because the history has been, there's really been no action, right? Can you give us your thoughts, Renee? And I talked a little bit about this, but can you give us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it goes back to two key things that currently limit the investments in women and minorities, and that's a bias and network. And you can say that you really want to support all founders, but if at the same time you don't even have email addresses on how people can reach out to you on your website, people that are outside of your network will never be able to get to you. So if you're really honest about wanting to see more different founders and wanting to make a change, I think that's where it starts. The next thing is bias. Bias is a human thing. Men, women, everybody has it. You tend to just invest in people that look like you, and in products that you understand. So, and again, it's a human thing, but since the VC world is white and male, that bias goes into that direction. And that's why we have this view of the successful founder as being a white guy with a hoodie. And that's why diversity on the VC side is so important to actually make change. And I also don't think it should be just women, because then you get the bias the other way. But the diversity on the VC side is just very important. So you actually get to invest in more different type of founders, and the numbers also show that funds that are more diverse invest more diverse. And so saying that you think it's really important and then your entire partnership is white and male just doesn't make any sense. So I think there's a few things that are really necessary to actually get to change beyond the words. And I haven't looked into the funds you just mentioned. Maybe they have that all in order. But I think those are two key things that people need to make sure. Your partnership needs to be diverse and you need to be approachable.
Yep. No, absolutely. Jenny, the next question for you. I don't need to ask you, Jenny, if you look for partners or VCs that are diverse, because I know you and I know that's important to you. The question I have for you is, why is that important? Why are those diversity of thought and expertise as partners? How does that help a startup be successful? Because I think it does. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think the thing that it's very easy to forget, especially at the beginning, is you're going to be working with your investors for 2, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 years. You don't know how long this journey is going to go. And I think that running a company is hard enough. If you're working with people that don't respect you, who make you feel uncomfortable, just all these different things that can be kind of built into not finding people who are supportive of you as a female entrepreneur, it just adds a load of friction, a load of kind of headaches into the journey that you really shouldn't be having to worry about. So for me, your relationship with investors is everything. Like I say, it's hard enough, and finding someone who's there to build you up and help you is so much more important than finding someone who will give you an extra amount of money. And I know in the chat there's kind of conversations around the Silicon Valley way and trying to fit that model versus the way that works for us. And I think that is a big part of it, is go for people who you gel well with. Don't necessarily go for the person who can give you the most money. And I think when it comes to that, I've got some red lines that, to be honest, if investors ask me questions, I rule them out in the same way that they do that to founders. So I run a fashion tech company. If someone says the magical words of, I don't know anything about this space, so I'm going to run it past my wife, or makes a joke to me about their wife's shoe habits and the fact that he has to go to work for pay for her shoes, I'm like, well, no, that conversation from my point of view is over, because I just disagree with the way that you're looking at the world there. And I found as well that it's kind of self-selecting. So there was a study done, I think it was the Harvard Business School, around the types of questions that investors are asking. And I think the way they ran it was they had an experiment where it's the same company, same pitch, one pitch delivered by a man, one pitch delivered by a woman. And they were looking at the types of questions that were asked at the end of the pitch. And for men, they were kind of given these leading questions that were giving them the opportunity to talk about how great their company could be. And the woman was being asked about all the barriers as to why her company wouldn't succeed. So it would be like, this market's worth, I don't know, 3 trillion, why are you going to get market share? That would be the question to a man. The woman would get the question around, well, there are loads of competitors in this space, how are you going to compete? So I think if you do have someone who has that kind of unconscious bias that we were all talking about earlier, that will come through in the way that they're talking to you. And to be honest, that will make you less likely to raise money with them. And that is obviously a huge fundamental problem in the investor space, which is why investment's so low for women. But if you are trying to consciously skew so that you're taking money from people who support women, it could be seen to work in your favor, like I say, eternal optimist. And I think as well, just kind of being conscious of those questions. So like I say, I've got some red lines. I've got ones as well that don't necessarily rule out an investor, but they make me worry that they might be biased. The one for me personally is I'm 32, nearly 33. I look younger. It doesn't matter. It doesn't alter my capability of running a company at all. But you would be surprised the number of investors who ask me, how old are you? And the number of investors who ask me if my relationship's serious, and you're like, wow, you would not ask a man in his 40s that question. So I think just kind of being conscious of the questions that you're being asked and working out how to handle them yourself. It's annoying that we have to think with those kind of hats on, but it's definitely worth doing it if you want to work with those people over a number of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think that we all know this is a not a supply problem, it's a cultural problem. We're talking about this, right? We're talking, you know, there is a very homogeneous group of, let's be honest, heavily weighted white males living in Northern California that tend to have networks that are hard for us to crack into. And that's a problem. That needs to change, right? There has to be more inclusion and diversity in wider network circles so we can fund more diverse founders and technology and startups. And Janneke, I want to address this question to you because your organization, Inspiring 50, I think is really unique in the sense that it's trying to plant the seed very early, even grade school early, in terms of starting the change at an early age to, you know, build in these diversity thoughts and networks very early on. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you think that can help down the line?
Yeah, so we really believe that role models play a key role in changing people. If she can see it, she can be it. I think we all know that phrase. And so we make sure that, well, the Inspiring 50, those are adults, that they are more visible and they are more often asked for interviews on stages, etc. But we also published the book for young girls because already at a very young age, girls tend to think that tech is boring, difficult, and not for them. But it mainly has to do with the wrong idea they have about tech. I once met a girl who said she preferred to collect garbage over working in tech. Then, you know, you have an image problem. But the thing is that if you ask these girls if they want to work at Instagram or Snapchat, they say yes. And that's also tech. So I want to make sure that they look different at what tech means. Not everybody needs to program. I think it's great if they can, but they don't have to. It's not for everybody. And what I would hate is when they close doors at a very early age, that they actually don't know they want open later on in their life. So we published a novel for young girls to show them tech in a different way. It's about a young girl that learns to code, builds an app, and then starts her own company, and then goes through everything you go through as an entrepreneur in tech, the fun stuff, but also the challenges. But through the book and through the story, they see what tech could mean for them. And even if we would convince a few girls, to choose a different study or anything, then that would already well, make a difference. And hopefully one day there will be a super famous CEO, and she will say, I started this career because of the book. And we published it also in a few countries and localized it also in a few countries because the localization part is really important. Somebody can only be a role model if you recognize yourself. So that's why we do that. And so, for example, for South Africa, the book is really different than for the US or the Netherlands.
I think this is one of the coolest things that you're doing, and I just love it. Can you, question in the chat, state the name of your book so everyone will know that.
The New Girl Code.
The New Girl Code, great.
I will put it in.
Yeah, put it in the chat for everyone. Just so cool. What a great way to start working on these challenges at a very early age. Maren, speaking of working on ways to get diverse mindsets, and you started January Ventures to help women and underrepresented founders. Can you talk about the progress you've seen and specifically with these kind of niche firms, and where you think these are going, and maybe some learnings that you've had over the years and the startups that you've worked with?
Sure. So first I just want to say, Janneke, I think that's so cool that you wrote the book. I didn't realize that. I was an engineering major undergrad, and I remember sitting in this computer science class with this like sea of men around me, and we were supposed to code a video game And I said, I hate video games. This isn't for me. And I still went on to be an engineering major, but I just wish that it had been taught in a way that was more appealing to different types of people. Because I think if I had realized I could have built Instagram or Snap, it would have been really cool, and I would have pursued it instead of thinking it was just about video games. So anyways, I love the book idea. I have 3 daughters, so I will absolutely buy it for them. But Amy, to answer your question, so I founded January. Basically, my background is all on the operating side, and I never aspired to be an investor. I have worked, all at operating roles and at startups, and it was really just seeing this huge problem in the market and wanting to go solve it, and also a huge opportunity. And I think I just saw this pattern over and over of the female and underrepresented founders around me having less access to capital, but then still, pulling through and building these great businesses. And so I'd been thinking about this for a long time and decided I wanted to go attack this problem next. So I think I really started January with the mindset of an operator. And I love working with early stage founders and helping them in the early days of their journeys. And I teamed up with my classmate, Jen, who was the co-founder of an accelerator in the US. So she had seen, hundreds of startups, and had seen the same problem just from a really different angle.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what led me to start January.
Did you get, what was the reception from traditional VCs and maybe some VCs you see at the table? How has that reception been?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen more and more this pattern of more diverse investors just going out and starting their own funds instead of going and saying, I'm going to spend 10 years working my way up at a big fund and playing all the politics and games and stuff like that, and kind of feeling like maybe you're banging your head against the wall. So more and more I'm just meeting, especially other women who are starting their own funds. And I think there's starting to be this great community of women really helping each other. I think the traditional funds are starting to notice, and I think they're starting to see it as a deal flow that they don't have access to. And so I think more and more we have some of the bigger funds who sort of want to work with us and get to know us. And I think a lot of it's just so that they can see the deal flow that we have. But I mean, hopefully we see a big shift. It just, all these women starting funds now, I mean, it's going to take a while for them to be successful and raise bigger funds and grow to the point where it becomes more mainstream.
For sure. Well, congratulations to you and keep up the good work. If the traditional firms are noticing, that's a good thing, right? We'll hope for progress. Renee and Jenny, I want to kind of stay on this subject of role models and helping perpetuate this change forward. Renee, we talked a little bit about it when your analogy of being on the ladder and extending a hand back. Can you talk about some actionable things that either you are doing or founders can do right now to help keep this change going?
Definitely. So I think one of the things that I've been doing for the last year is really demystifying data, particularly for a lot of young people and a lot of women. It's really important. I think for a very long time there was this fear, and math was used as a point of reference to include or to exclude. And I think what we've been doing from a perspective of urban AI is really generating a lot of conversation, a lot of excitement about AI, about its power and its potential and its pervasiveness and the kinds of things that can be created and how it can be used to really impact humanity in a very positive way. Although I do focus on the risks and those long-term socio-technical risks that we need to be aware of from the perspective of AI ethics. It's a technology that I'm extremely excited about. And I've been trying to generate that kind of excitement, particularly in diverse communities. And when I speak about diversity, I do speak about the broadest aspect of it, including individuals with disabilities, which is really a passion of mine, because many of the technologies we are seeing are actually technologies that are assisted technologies for persons with disabilities as well, and just an enormous amount of creativity in that space. And I think what we're seeing now is this great excitement being generated. It feels as though there is a rediscovery of diverse talents. And I think from my perspective, it is about education. It is about public awareness. It's about a lot of public engagement and bringing diverse stakeholders into this conversation. When it comes to role models, I think in everything we do, we are all role models. But I think when it comes to mentorship, we've got to understand reciprocal mentorship, because sometimes we bring different talents to the table. So sometimes you may be great in something and I may be great in something else. And it's about those collaborative efforts that we need. I think it's about collective intelligence right now. And what we're seeing is this combination of mind and machine, and really generating that excitement around it. I think from a funding perspective, we're all really thrilled that there is this new attention being placed in spaces that, that were, seemingly not spaces that individuals look for creativity, but it's really about dealing with the insularity. And one of the things I've found, particularly with tech, is that tech speaks to tech, funders speak to funders, mentors speak to mentors. And we've got to open not only the doors, but we've got to open the windows now. We've got to open the windows, and we got to lift those shutters up and let people know they're welcome inside. And I think that's what people are waiting for, to know that, you didn't open the door, but you said, come in. And that's what I'm hoping to do. Let people know, and I want that as well. Someone that says, not the door is open, but just come in, you're welcome. And I think that's what people are hearing. And that's what we hope this new energy is about, saying that you're welcome. Have a seat at the table.
I love that analogy. That's excellent. Jenny, how about your thought? Any actionable thing that you're doing right now or can be done?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm not sure about everyone else on this panel, but the notion of being a role model took me a while to get used to, because I'm just doing what I do, right? And then you hear people speak, like what Renee just said. It's like, it's impossible not to be inspired by that. So I think just kind of putting yourself out there, giving more talks, making sure you're more visible is a huge part of what you should be doing as a role model, even if you don't think that you are one necessarily. It's just kind of part of what you do. I think as well, trying to spread that role model duty. Sounds a bit strange, but you've got to kind of remind yourself you don't want to be the exception. You don't want to be the sole woman in AI who's doing her thing and everyone knows her. You want to be exceptional, but you want loads of other women around you. And I think that kind of keeping perspective on that, making sure that you're spreading around those duties, inviting friends that you think are really smart in, and kind of really making sure that instead of there just being a handful of young role models for young women, there's a load of us just proving that it's not an exceptional thing that we're doing. It's just a part of life. We're women and we're building companies and we're working in technology. It's normal. And I think that when that kind of narrative switches from this is really hard and exceptional to it's just something that we're doing and we're great at it, I think that's where we'll really see kind of velocity and younger people really getting more into science and technology. I think as well, kind of making sure on that note, you're leading by example. So to be honest, this is the only talk I do on gender per year. I save it for the F word, you'll be pleased to know, but all of my other talks, I do a lot of public speaking. They're all in AI, they're all in technology. I want to be known as someone in technology who's great, who happens to be a woman, rather than someone who's a woman starting a business and isn't it hard. So I think kind of picking your narrative is very important when you're asked to be in this kind of role model position. And then finally, I'd say kind of also kind of putting yourself out there and making yourself visible, but also making sure that you're focusing time on something you really know that you can influence. So to Maren's point, actually, that's really weird. I did computer science and I had to make a computer game. So that was one of my bits of coursework. And now I'm an advisor to my old university for the computer science course. And one of the points I'm actually raising is it prohibitive to people who don't like video gaming, whether they're men or women, it doesn't really matter, but it kind of gives you that very narrow view of what computer science is. So I think kind of going back to points in your past where you kind of felt a bit of friction was there and seeing if you can help now and kind of change that will help kind of your old younger self try and be the person that you wish was there to try and help you smash some glass ceilings and do the right thing for the younger generations.
That's great. Big shoes to fill, right? But good shoes to fill. I'm keeping a watch on my clock to make sure we've got a lot to talk about. But I did want to touch on this next subject a little bit, which is around some possible other stalls that are maybe stalling women leading or women getting into leadership positions in companies, whether that's VC, whether that's a startup, whether that's scale-ups that are growing their business. And that is this idea around, well, let me start with this. McKinsey did a report, Women in the Workplace, and the report talked about how we tend to address women in leadership positions, getting women to the C-suite, which is very important. But the program, I mean, the data talked about that there's less focus on entry-level positions and promotions to that mid-management position, which is very important, right? Because that's your funnel into the leadership. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Janke, I want to start with you. You just spoke wonderfully about your book and how you're teaching young women that tech isn't about just hard stuff. You can be in marketing, you can be in sales, you can be in creative. Can you talk a little bit about how something like this, how we open that funnel just a little bit more? And then I want to get the other panelists' opinions on this as well.
You mean the funnel for entry-level positions?
Yeah, the entry level to that mid-management, there's the gap there of promotions. So women are getting overlooked there. And wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think an important point there is also, well, I don't want to put the burden on women, because I think companies need to adapt the way they select people for promotions. They should just see who should get a promotion and not who shouts the loudest. But I also think for women, it's important to speak up more. I always believe that when you would do the right thing, that people would notice, and it's just not the case. So you can wait for everything to change, and I think things should change, but I also think you can do something yourself by making sure that people notice you're there. And girls tend to grow up being told that they should be modest and not ask for too much attention, and that they are pretty. But I think that doesn't get you where you need to be. And while we wait for also the system to change, I think it's important to make sure that people notice you, that you say, well, I'm doing great stuff. Because if you don't believe it, why would anybody else? And it's not easy to do that, because for me, it took me quite some time to get over myself, basically. And also, especially here in the Netherlands, you are, well, it's not, you're supposed to be average, and so it's yeah, it's difficult, but you have to do it. You have to make sure that you do it. And one thing that somebody told me that helps with that is, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but what I really see here is when you get a compliment, you tend to dismiss the compliment. And if somebody says, "Oh, you have a great dress," "Oh, it's not that great. It was only $10 or whatever," and that's just stupid, because basically you tell the other person they have no taste while they say something nice about you. So that person told me, when you get a compliment, just say thank you. And that already helps in the process of just not making yourself smaller than you are.
No, it's a great point. Any thoughts on this for the panelists? Because I do want to get to some other topics, because I've realized we're at 10 o'clock. We've got 30 more minutes. So anything on this before we move into?
I could just jump in. I think she made an excellent point, and it's about confidence. And I think as women, we sometimes try to just downplay our talents, and we've got to understand, when it comes to men in the C-suite, and I spent a lot of time there in the C-suite as a communications specialist and a crisis specialist doing a lot of training, you find that sometimes very mediocre men bluff their way straight to the CEO's position, and women, we're always downplaying ourselves. So I think it's really about that level of confidence, and just about us building each other up, complimenting each other, saying to each other, you're doing a great job, and just letting each other know that we've got your back. And I think this is where the allies come in, and this is where the mentorship comes in. It really is something that's lifelong. So she makes an excellent point. And, I just want to tell her that she's absolutely amazing. And I'm going to get that book as well.
That's wonderful. Well said. I want to shift a little bit to talk about technologies from the standpoint of what both Maren and Janneke are seeing in terms of what technologies you guys are looking at. But I want to start with AI because it's the big one, and specifically ethical AI. And Renee, this is for you. This is your background. But can you talk about, first of all, can you define ethical AI? I know you touched on it at the beginning, but define what is ethical AI and why you think this moment is such an opportunity for AI that we have to get right. Can you talk about that?
Sure, and I just like to keep it simple. Ethical AI, AI we can trust. And how can we trust it? We know that it is responsible. We know that it is accountable. We know it is transparent, and we know it is explainable. I think those are the things people want to know. So when it comes to AI ethics, for me, it's not a philosophy. And yes, we know the philosophy of ethics, but it's something that we need to operationalize at every stage of the life cycle. So we know we don't want to do harm with the technology. We know we've got to understand the long-term negative impacts of the technology. And we also know that we've got to include diversity in the design of the technology. We've got to detect and mitigate risks such as bias and discrimination. And now I think what we're realizing is because much of our data sets have been built up on a system, particularly in the United States, of systemic racism, what we're realizing is baked into the data that we are using are these systems of exclusion and systems that highlight the disparities and the inequalities. So ethical AI is really about bringing fairness to the process and understanding that if it is we are going to use this technology to make big decisions or any decisions, because that's what algorithms do. They're predictive and they make decisions, and we're seeing those decisions in everything from criminal justice to finance to healthcare to education, decisions that alters people's lives, right? We know AI is the big game changer. What we're saying is that it has to be responsible enough. There must be a system of redress if an algorithmic decision-making tool makes a decision about your life. And I think people need to know that these systems, because AI is a collective of systems, it's not just one thing, right? These tools. And if they're going to be making decisions, they've got to be responsible and held to the same high standards of decision-making in society. So there must be some level of regulation and there must be some level of legal redress. And we've got to understand that the technology must do no harm.
Yes, and absolutely. And AI is so powerful and impacts so many areas of our lives and so many technologies that having these discussions have to be had, right, before it gets too far out of control. Jenny, you are someone that algorithms and machine learning is close to your heart. You've made a very successful company out of it at SnapVision. Can you talk about that from terms of how you approach always advancing for your company, but also keeping in mind the standards that have to be applied as we advance this very powerful technology?
Yeah, definitely. I'm always one for saying that AI should be kind of replacing jobs that need no conscious decisions and conscious thoughts, rather than that kind of really cutting edge decision making stuff. And the reason that I believe that is to do with the quality of data that we're able to feed algorithms. I guess an example of that, there was a recent study, I've got it on Twitter so I can share it after this, I can look later. And it was looking at the way that men and women are described in literature. So looking at adjectives around women, looking at adjectives around men, and then using that to try and create AI-generated descriptions of men and women. And they found that these were books written by real people over a number of years. I think it's around 200 years worth of literature. And adjectives like pretty and delicate and quiet we used to describe women. And then adjectives like powerful and strong and decisive we used to describe men. So when the AI was generating these descriptions, obviously there was no malice there, it's a computer, but it was building on generations of this kind of inbuilt bias. So I think that when you're looking at where you get data from, the world is definitely not perfect at the moment, but we're listening and we're improving the way that we're kind of treating loads of different diverse types of people. So I think we've got to make sure that our data is modern. And I know that sounds like a really weird statement, but it's just making sure that as our opinions and as a society is, fingers crossed, going to update, we've got to make sure that we're not relying on historic data, because we're going to be building historic bias into our systems. And I think as well, kind of making sure when you're building an AI system that you are being conscious of diversity. And it's like when you look at the data that you're feeding into a system, you're looking for its accuracy and is it labeled right? Is it segmented right? You should also be looking at your data going, do I have basically a diverse data set? And that should be just as important as is that data set accurate. And there's technical ways of checking for this. So one thing that we do in-house is we do ROC curves where we check for overfitting. And overfitting is a symptom of your data not being diverse enough. So I think as people become more robust in the way that they're testing their AI systems, that's going to drive more focus to where we're getting data from. And I think just making sure that we're sense checking that it's not performing well against bad data is probably the biggest problem that the industry is going to face in the coming years. So yeah, I think as well, a lot of that is around how diverse your team is building it, and making sure that you've got people who are diverse, aware of diversity, and also customers as well who are valuing that. I think those kind of three things coming together will make things hopefully more robust going forward.
Right. We could do an entire month just on the topic around AI and ethics and all that goes into it. I want to switch to through the eyes of our VCs. Janneke, to you, COVID has certainly disrupted certain technologies and industries. The travel industry is not the best place to be in right now, but we've seen the rise of, communication platforms like Zoom and collaboration tools. Can you talk about, from your eyes, what you see is maybe just a trend during this time and what you think is lasting, and maybe what your firm is looking at in terms of technologies?
Yeah, so I think in general, it's a great time to start a business. This is the third time I've started in a crisis, and crises have proven to generate a lot of amazing companies. If you look at the companies which started at the last crisis, they are the unicorns of today. So I think every crisis creates change in our society, and those changes generate a lot of options. So it's a matter of jumping on them. I think if you look at our funds, there's three areas we specifically focus on: digital health, education, and business to business SaaS. And they've shown for the last months to quite thrive. I think a crisis will in the end hit everybody, but those type of companies grow. And I think especially in healthcare and education, the digital transformation has speeded so much. I mean, what they normally would have taken 10 years to do, I think they've now done in a few months. And it has had such a big impact on the mindset of the people working in those industries that we will see even more from those types of businesses. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in those areas.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. We have seen a compressed timeline in terms of change, right? It's really,
yes.
And you're right. We see oftentimes these type of crises do breed the best companies. Maren, kind of same question to you. What are you guys looking at January VC? I mean, January Ventures, and what are your big bets coming out of this now and in the future?
Sure. So as a fund, we look a lot at B2B software and also at digital health. So similar to Janneke, I personally am looking a lot at digital health. My background is all in healthcare. I've been excited about digital health for the past decade and have seen it just not really take off in the way that you would expect. But I think we're finally reaching this tipping point where a lot of the behavioral changes are happening and a lot of the regulatory changes are happening that will enable some of these technologies to really break out. So I think it's a really exciting time. We're looking a lot at, tech enabling remote clinical trials, decoupling of hospitals, home monitoring, telemedicine, So I think there are a lot of interesting things out there. I think it's the first time where both patients and physicians are incentivized to use telemedicine. And I mean, the tools have been there for a while, but finally both sides are using it, and I think that's going to stick.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. I want to kind of segue a bit into, speaking of disruptions, the venture capital industry itself has been disrupted over the years, right? What was traditional funding size and stages has changed dramatically, right? We've seen the rise of some very big checks written at different stages, wild amounts. We've seen companies staying private longer. We've seen the rise of kind of mega funds. So what I'd love to do, and Janke, I'd love for you to, if you could maybe help clarify those kind of traditional stages, if you will, pre-seed, seed. How do you look at that now in terms of benchmarks and check sizes for those? Will we see kind of a right sizing back to some sort of normalcy coming out of post-COVID? How do you view that?
That's a very difficult question, because I think those stages are really a way also for funds to let other people know where they sort of focus, but yeah, they've blended, and it really depends on the type of company that you're in today, whether those checks are smaller or larger or nothing has changed. Depending also on how you have been thriving through this crisis. I think in travel, valuations have gone down massively, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, the stages. Yeah, for us, we do seed and we do check sizes up to 2 million. And some other people that do seed do check sizes up to 1 million. So it's not that clear. No, I'm afraid you can't really say, oh, see this check size, A is this. In the end, if a fund wants to invest in you, then they will. And it really depends. It's really more to manage deal flow and for companies to know who to approach, but it's never that strict. But Maren, maybe you disagree.
Yeah, Maren, I love your thoughts on this, because it is a complex topic, right? It is very complex. It's moving, and we even see, traditional Series A move down the funnel into seed, so it's causing some sort of confusion. Can you give us your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I think what I've seen is over the past 10 years, everything has just shifted bigger. So today's seed is like the Series A of 10 years ago. And right now, I think at the seed stage, companies are often raising 3 rounds. There's often a pre-seed, and then there's a seed, and then there's a post-seed. So seed has become not really a stage, but more of like a phase that often lasts for 3 years. And I think I think that's like the general trend that I've seen since COVID. I think surprisingly, I haven't seen things slow down. If anything, at the early stage, things have really sped up. Every company seems to be raising, and it's really, really busy. And I think a lot of the bigger funds are dipping into seed, because if you're a Series A fund, they feel maybe more comfortable writing a small check if they can't meet a founder in person and just kind of dipping into a seed deal. So I think though at the really early stage, it is difficult now, and especially in ecosystems where there's a less developed angel ecosystem. So as you get outside of San Francisco, and you're a female or underrepresented founder, and you don't have like a friends and family network or the angel network to support you, it can be really hard to get the traction needed to get to that institutional seed raise, which the traction that these funds are looking for is really significant. So I think that's where funds like mine really play, is in this pre-seed to early seed phase where founders really just need that capital so they can get moving faster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly, we've had a familiar theme of strong networks and strong mentorships to help. And this is one of those areas I think that would certainly help guide people through. Renee, if I'm remembering correctly, you'll probably be raising soon, or if you haven't already thought about that, how do you view this landscape today? Can you give us some thoughts through the eyes of a founder?
Right. Well, I think the landscape is really looking very, very intriguing in the sense that we're seeing so much. And as Maren says, things are moving really quickly. What we're calling AI expansionism, particularly for those of us working in AI. And there's this big grab for data that we're seeing coming from big tech. And everyone's looking for the next big idea when it comes to something that deals with particularly COVID-19 related challenges, so that contactless interface, you know, the esports, the tele-education, medicine, all of those are the big areas. Now in the US, they're looking for things that are around policing and reimagining and reinventing the ways in which we police our communities. And now that we're seeing a moratorium and a halt in technologies like facial recognition, and you know, governments are calling for law enforcement to rethink the ways in which they do things. So in my area, there's just a lot of opportunity now because of COVID, because of the fact that, you know, the opportunities that you had pre-COVID, the interviews and all the things that you had set up, you know, everything has been put on hold. So now it's really about regrouping mentally, which is, I think, what I've been doing now. And really, a lot of the ideas that we had pre-COVID are no longer relevant as we try to negotiate our way out of this pandemic. So it's really putting a lot of pressure on us to now rethink and to re-strategize and rebrand and really reimagine, because one of the things that we've realized is that even thinking out of the box is now dated, because the box that we were thinking in has been destroyed. So it really now is about really getting the right people to move me along the different stages at this point, and really ensuring, because there's a lot of competition now. There's really an extraordinary amount of competition, and no one was expecting AI to move this quickly. We were still looking at slower movement, but the progress with the technology and the demands of the technology to really step up to the plate has been extraordinary. So in this crisis, indeed, there's you know, major opportunities, but now it really is, I'm at the place of, you know, I'm here and I've just got to do big things in real time. So it's really been a lot of conversations, looking for the right type of allies and looking for the individuals who are already inside, as I keep saying, to let you know, when is your time to step in. So it's an interesting place that I'm in. It's very intricate thinking for me right now, but it's the biggest challenge and the greatest challenge at the right time, and I'm just so ready for it.
Well, good luck to you. I think if I'm a betting woman, I'm betting on you. I think you'll be just successful, very successful. Jenny, anything you want to add there? I know you touched on how you successfully rate. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll keep it quick, but I think it's just kind of remember to bear in mind that success isn't driven by how much money you raise, and that can be a bit of a kind of misnomer in startup land, is they're successful because they've raised X, Y, and Z. So I'd say anyone kind of starting out thinking about fundraising, and even people actually midway, it's kind of, I always see venture capital as a route to reaching your next goal. So kind of view it as a graph where you need to raise. So it's kind of define what is that next goal that you're raising for? Who do you need to do it? What do you need to do to succeed to get there? To be honest, double it, because you probably won't have thought of anything. And then that kind of defines how much you need to raise and what kind of partner you should be looking at. So instead of trying to optimize for a trend of like, SoftBank have loads of money, they're plowing it into SaaS, let's go big and go for it. It's like, well, what do you personally need? Because these trends, like so many things in life, they won't necessarily work for you. So yeah, I think don't be tempted by trying to raise as much as humanly possible. Your equity is as valuable as any other asset that you've got. So if you can do it and bootstrap it, I am insanely jealous of anyone who has bootstrapped a company and hasn't had to raise money. It's awesome.
Yes, that's an excellent point, because I think we can say that the growth at all cost mantra didn't really work that well. You can take a look at some of the SoftBank's ventures, but we won't go there. I'm going to have to skip over some topics because we are coming close. We're at 10:19. I knew we wouldn't have enough time to get into everything, but I do want to skip to two last points that I think are important. And that is talking about our failures. We touched on this a little bit, but I think that everyone should learn to embrace failure as just the natural progression in the learning process. But that's hard, and that's particularly hard for women because there's this perfection, or we don't want to make mistakes. And you know, but embracing that is a really powerful thing. And also sharing our mistakes is a powerful thing. So for all four of you, I'd like for you to tell me, number one, what was maybe a big mistake that you want to share, but more importantly, what you learned from it and how it made you more, you know, stronger and more insightful. And Marin, I want to start with you.
Sure. So one comment that I have on failure is I think that there's a really strong culture in the Bay Area around almost like failure is not a big deal. Failure is sort of part of it. And I think as I've gone to other startup ecosystems, I don't think that mindset is there as much. And I think that mindset is really helpful because I think failure is part of the journey, and every entrepreneur is going to have 100 small failures. In terms of my failures, I guess since being an investor, I would say the failures that I look back and have regrets are when I loved a founder and didn't like a market and I passed. And I look back and you know, I've seen that founder then pivot into something that I do love. And so that has been a good learning, that so much at the really early stages about the founder.
Yes, you hear that so often. Bet on the founder if you find it. Yannicka, can you share?
Sorry, I had to unmute. No, so I think, well, you fail all the time, and it's being an entrepreneur can be extremely lonely, because you don't always have people to talk to about the things you go through. And when you would look at your competitors, you might easily think that they all do amazing because you get the information about them through press releases. So I think it's really important to have a network of fellow entrepreneurs where you can have honest conversations with. And I think the fact that you know you're not alone in your struggles, it already makes a big difference. And knowing that everybody goes through the same thing, basically. So I've actively built a network of fellow entrepreneurs that I have dinner with every like 2-3 months, to just discuss things. And that's super helpful, and I think really important.
Yep, that's great. Renee.
I think for me, I always say that failure is like a research opportunity, because the information that you have gathered while you are trying to create that plan that you may think was not successful, that's like intelligence gathering. And it's information that you've used, you're building up your mastery muscle, you're building up that muscle in the brain, and it's really information that's never going to be discarded, because the same information from that experience that you may think is a failed experience is information that will always stay with you and will help bolster any other plan that you have in the future. For me, it's always just like a research opportunity. I don't focus on failure. I focus on how do I take what I have learned and how do I use that to create a step. So every situation where you think of it as being a failure, think of it as though you've just built another step, and you're going to get there to the top really quickly.
Great. Excellent advice. Jenny.
I need to learn from you. I was up all night with my greatest hits of things I've done wrong. My brain was playing it to me last night. I think my one is not taking so long. So that kind of slightly stereotypical view that we talked about earlier, where kind of women wait to ask for the promotion, or kind of they wait until they're overqualified. I definitely did that at the beginning. I wrote the original algorithms for Snap back in 2008, and I founded the company in 2011. And I think that kind of realizing that being an entrepreneur, kind of throwing caution to the wind, isn't a bad life plan, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to do. That's probably my biggest regret, is taking so long. So I try and take that into everyday life now. It's kind of, if I've got something where it's on the edge of where I'm comfortable, just kind of pushing through that comfort zone and knowing that even if it goes wrong, like we all said, you can learn from it.
That's great. Very wise statements. We are going to transition into Q&A. We could keep talking. We have so much content, but I do want to get to some of the audience questions. Eve, are you there to possibly get some of these questions out, or would you like me to handle that?
And I go off mute. Wow, that was such an inspirational discussion over there. And indeed, it's the time. It's the right time for questions. I see a few questions there, but I would like to actually allow our participants to have their voices heard. So, if you have a question, type that you have a question, and I will enable you asking the question directly to our panelists. So, I see there is a question first of all from Maria Silverton. She addressed it in Q&A. So Maria, how about we just give you that voice? Maria, you can ask the question now.
Hello?
Yes, awesome.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, my question, it's about valuations. It was mentioned a little bit during the discussion on raising funds. Yeah, I'm running a customer-funded startup, have been for the last almost 4 years, and we're currently developing a new product that we think could benefit from raising funds. But I've noticed that it's really hard to get good information on valuations and how to determine, basically what should be the valuation you pitch. So my question is if anyone has any tips or even recommended reads on this topic.
Thank you for the question. Who would like to answer to this?
Yeah, maybe that's one for our VCs there with Maren and or Janneke, if you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's I'm afraid not an easy question to answer because it depends on what kind of product, what kind of market traction you already have, the business model that's behind it. So there's so many things that play a role in coming up with a valuation, and then even early stage, it's often still just made up basically. But the more data there is, the better you can set a valuation. But that's in this case, I can't answer it because I don't have enough information.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I was mainly wondering if there's like specifics in B2B SaaS, for example, that maybe you knew that there's recommended reads or books about this topic, but yeah, from what I've seen,
for
it is
business
definitely...
to business SaaS, you can find a lot with Faster. They also publish a lot about valuations.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm happy to give my take as well if it helps from the kind of founder perspective, but valuation is obviously something that I've struggled with over the years, just because you're always kind of justifying it to investors, and rightfully so. So I found the two ways that I can kind of filter through that. One is kind of competitor comparisons. So if whatever you want to compare against, whether it's technology, number of clients, EBITDA, I think that's, even if it's not the right way of valuing something, you've kind of got that stake in the ground for someone else has managed to raise a capital with that valuation, so you know you're in the right ballpark. I think the other useful thing that I've started doing is looking at what an investor's portfolio looks like and looking at what their investment thesis is. So they've normally got a metric that they're skewing to, whether it's EBITDA, MRR, all these kind of various things. And you can kind of work out if they put in X amount of money into a company, then the valuation is probably a multiple. So it sits about Y. So even if you're just kind of benchmarking against their current portfolio and what they think is reasonable and what drives value, then that's also a good thing to do. Because ultimately, like Janneke said, there's no concrete way of valuing a startup. It's all about your potential and where you think the value is. So I think just finding people who are like-minded, you have a like-minded portfolio, will give you a good steer to what the value might be.
Thank you very much. There is another question, unless there is still an answer to this one. Nope. Okay. Kennedy Stewart, ask a question. Kennedy, the floor is yours to hear your voice.
Hi. My question is, how do you connect with other female VCs as far as funding startups that do not relate with tech?
Okay. Well, Maren, maybe
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understood the question. How do I connect with other VCs, or did you understand it?
So the way it's written, how do you connect with other female investors and VCs as far as funding startups that do not relate with tech? Can I say?
That do not relate with tech. So maybe what she means is if you have a startup that's not a tech startup, how do you meet VCs? I'm happy to answer that. I mean, I think just doing your research on investors, and you can often find that on their websites or Crunchbase, but there are some that are very focused on consumer products and have less of a tech focus, and then there are others that are very software focused and will invest in consumer products. So just know who you're trying to pitch. Let me know if that was not the question that was being answered, though.
Can I say, is it a good answer to your question?
Well, I have tried to do research, but I haven't really come across anyone in the market that I'm looking for. So I was trying to wonder, like, how do I go about that? Is there any other way? Because when I do the research, I haven't come across anything.
For a non-technical product?
Non-technical business, yes.
A non-technical business. So part of the issue might be that just the way that venture is structured, and a lot of venture funds need to have unicorns in their portfolio in order to return their fund and return any money to their LPs and continue to raising funds. And so I think part of the issue might be that they're like the scale of venture is it has to be really, really big exits, which is in many ways like more suited to software and tech. So I think I would say like just find the more like alternative types of funding. There are some funds that do it, but some of the more there's some like venture debt and stuff like that would do more consumer products. But sorry, I don't have great advice there. Good luck.
It's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kennedy, for asking. Love the courage. And the time is pretty much over 4:30. So let's do the last question. There are many of questions, and we'll finish that. I hope everyone is okay with the last question. I see Stephanie. Stephanie, how about you also ask that directly?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for such an inspiring discussion. My particular question is to Renee. Looking at your portfolio, you have such diversity and talent. I was just curious to know if you had discovered anything along your journey that pushed you to where you are today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you for that question, Stephanie. I think it really is about staying intellectually curious. It's about always asking questions. It's about sometimes just putting my hand up and saying that I'm here. And it's also about resilience. And I think for me, resilience has brought me this far, and knowing that I'm called to service, and whatever I do, it's about helping other individuals. And I'm just committed to that. And I think that is the energy that keeps me moving forward, knowing that always in every stage, there's someone there who's just waiting for someone to hold their hands and take them a little further.
That is excellent, and an awesome way to end and wrap this up. Renee, thank you. And thank you for hanging in. We're a little over the time limit, but I wanted to just say thank you to the panelists. You are very inspiring. I look forward to continuing our networking and relationships. Eve, thank you to you and Women in AI and the partnership. I do believe that we will, for those questions we couldn't get to, We will make sure we get those to the panelists and get your answers back, which is, so you will have your questions answered. We're also gonna have some follow-up content that we'll be publishing in the next couple of weeks that will dive even deeper and give you even more insights into these ladies' wonderful brains and thoughtful strategies. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you. That was amazing. Bye-bye.